So what is Express Entry? Express Entry is an intake management system that came into effect in January, and it applies to the three primary economic streams for permanent residents to Canada, including the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Federal Skilled Trade Program, and the Canadian Experience Class. It also acts as an intake system for a small percentage right now of the provincial nominee allocations that are granted to each of the individual jurisdictions as well. Express Entry is not a new permanent resident stream. It really is an intake management system. So the idea is to limit the number of applications that Citizenship and Immigration Canada is actually processing in a given year to mirror with the immigration levels that are set. So instead of having an inventory of a backlog of 2 years worth of applications, the idea is to only invite those that they can feasibly process within that set time frame. Ideally, the system will allow more flexibility as well as allow Citizenship and Immigration to process the applications that they do take in within a 6-month average is what they're working towards. One thing that's important to note, that 6-month time frame that has been touted many times by immigration, that time frame actually only starts at the point that an electronic application has been filed and has been reviewed and noted as complete. So it's not when you create the profile, it's not when you even submit the Express Entry application, it's actually once an initial review is done and confirmed that that application is complete. Right now we're seeing about 8 weeks to get to that completeness stage. So right now you're looking anywhere on average from an 8 to 10 month process in some cases. The system is also designed to improve outcomes for economic immigrants. So again, while this was touted as an intake management system, it does have an impact in terms of how we're selecting economic immigrants to come to Canada. There's a much greater role for employers to play, and that will be even more so going forward in terms of the labor market actually selecting immigrants. So that's a bit of a shift from where we were in the past, where there was a percentage, usually through the provincial nominee streams, where employers had a role in selecting immigrants, with the requirement to have the arranged offer of employment in many cases for people to be selected. That shift is actually happening. And so I'll be very curious to see in the next year the selection trends and the source countries where immigrants are coming from and how much of a shift there is between historical application levels and levels going forward. The other thing that's important to note with the new process as well is that there are no longer any occupation caps for the Federal Skilled Worker Program or limitations beyond the immigration levels that are set every year within Parliament. So that's a positive. So it does open up the application process in terms of more people being eligible, at least to be considered and to enter into the Express Entry pool. A very quick note on immigration levels for 2015. You'll note here that we're looking at a range of between 47,000 and 51,000 for the federal skilled programs, about 21 to 23,000 for CEC, and then close to 50,000 for provincial nominees. This is the highest number that we've seen historically for the Canadian Experience Class, so this is up from past years. Realistically, most of this year's numbers will come from the existing inventory that was already in place as of December 31st. It will probably be 2017 before we see the bulk of applications being selected from Express Entry. There's still an inventory currently of applications that were submitted last year that their Citizenship and Immigration is working through. So this year really is a bit of a test year for Express Entry. For those of you who've had the opportunity to review Citizenship and Immigration's mid-year report, and if you haven't, I strongly suggest that you take a quick look at that. What it does is it actually breaks out the number of applications that were received, a bit of an insight into who's sitting in the pool currently. But the one thing that struck me was as of beginning of July, they had actually only processed just under 700 applications in Express Entry through to landing. So very small number for the first half of the year. That will likely increase for the second half. But it was an interesting number for me to see that we're only sitting at about 700 people as of July that had come through the system successfully. As I mentioned, the programs that are included in Express Entry include the Federal Skilled Trade, Federal Skilled Worker, Canadian Experience class, and a certain percentage of the provincial nominee programs. Applicants who qualify under one or more of these streams and who are entered into the express entry pool will be considered for rounds of invitations based on the program that they're eligible for. Interestingly, to date, all of the invitation rounds have been general invitation rounds, with the exception of one, and that was back in February, and it was a Canadian Experience class specific draw. And the reason that they did that was that there was actually inadvertently a number of letters sent out invitation letters for people under the Federal Skilled Program for those that didn't qualify, and so they actually should have been selected under express entry. So that particular draw was a bit of a catch-up. But other than that, all of the draws have been based primarily on the ranking score as opposed to program specific. If you have clients that qualify under more than one of these, they will be issued a letter of invitation based on a priority as listed here. So if they're eligible for federal skilled trade, they will be issued an invitation letter under federal skilled trade. If they qualify for both federal skilled worker as well as CEC, they're likely to get an invitation letter under federal skilled worker as opposed to CEC. There's not a great way to self-select for some of the streams right now. One exception would be for those educated outside of Canada. If they get if they require the points, they would get an education credential assessment. But if they're here under and also qualify under CEC and they don't need the points, don't get the education credential assessment done, and they will default to CEC in terms of that invitation, because it's a requirement for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, but not for CEC. So that's really the only way I found to self-select between those two streams. Otherwise, you can assume that you're going to get selected for Federal Skilled Worker if they're eligible for both. I wanted quickly to talk a little bit about the employer perspective. To the extent those of us are now working with employers or individuals who have confirmed offers of employment, I wanted to go through some of the reasons why employers may want to get more involved. Even if you're approached by an individual, if they're currently working in Canada, there's also some incentive for the employer if they want to maintain that employment relationship to help support them through this process. So many employers are conscious about the fact that a number of their existing workers may be subject to the 4-year cap as of April of this year. So certainly that's a concern more for the semi-skilled occupations. Intercompany transfers are also subject to a maximum period of stay in their specific categories, and if there's not another option for other work permits, then transitioning to permanent residence is also important. Looking at the cap for low wage as well, so employers again looking potentially to promote lower skilled workers here to higher level positions. And then generally, there has been a lot of change around the International Mobility Program, around applying for labour market impact assessments, such that employers are more reluctant to keep trying to renew work permits if there's an option for permanent residence. So in the past, employers may have said, we'll help with the work permit, but not permanent residence. There is more incentive now on the part of employers to support this process.